guilty as an accessory to the fact. And the part on page 18 deals with a man comparatively not important at all. Volk, the secretary of Paul. And this is what the court says in the last paragraph on the same page.
May have been in himself a rather unimportant figure so far as the Nazi supreme hierarchy is concerned, but the evidence establishes that he was an essential, integral member of the organization which accomplished crimes, atrocities, and inhumanities unparalleled in the history of the human race. The crime of the concentration camps of the Third Reich is a crime the whole world knows. This judgment does not suggest that Leo Volk actively participated in the beatings and other ill treatment practiced on the concentration camp inmates, but it does declare, as it did in its original judgment, that he was a vital figure in one branch of the Wirtschafts- und Verwaltungshauptamt responsible for the concentration camps of Germany and occupied countries.
And when these are the criterions to legal principles, and if we examine the proof and evidence, the central evidence about direct corroboration in regard to crimes against the Jewish people and against humanity, the conquered and vanquished Poland was from the very start designated to be the territory where Jews would find their final solution. The criminal conspiracy now went over to find a general and inclusive solution. Eichmann tried to bring to court the Nisko plan as his contribution to a constructive solution. What happened at Nisko, we heard from the witnesses Burger and Pratt. Kratky remembers those deported from Stettin to Nisko. There was torture, camouflaged, an attempt to create a fait accompli of sending thousands of Jews to the general gouvernement, and this with a pretense of creating a Jewish home. Part of those Jews were deported forcibly to the Russian zone, and those who remained behind were to be starved to death were it not for the Jewish institutions. Those who deported maliciously made the fate of the deportees unbearable to decimate their numbers. They were told not to drink the water, and a chain of SS men prevented them from moving about. Here too, Eichmann brought a number of Jewish functionaries to show them and to talk them into coming over to this place of their own free will. Vyslitseny said that Eichmann deported Jews to Nisko hurriedly, taking it for granted that in Poland there will be a political solution. In any case, the accused committed here an action to which he had no authority even from the Reich authorities above him. He deported those men from territories wherein there were centers for emigration to the territory held by his colleague Globocnik. And he argued in court that Brandt was so furious until he tried to arrest him for an unauthorized action. This Frank tried but did not succeed. And those who returned from Nisko later were ordered to give a false report to the police that they were coming back from training camps. He gave this order, that this was the information to be given to the police, and he could not explain when questioned why this Nisko deportation had to be camouflaged even from their own police. When these details are put together, the picture is clear. Eichmann implements the orders and decisions of the meeting in December 1939, especially in the uprooting of Jews from Reich territory, from Austria and the Protectorate. The formal problems do not bother him. The general government regime, in the territories there are millions of Jews. They will be put before a fait accompli. There will be such chaos during the first months, and they will not realize what is actually happening. But this thing somehow did not succeed. Frank, who knew nothing about the new Jewish homeland, the Eichmann version, demanded to have the Jews returned to their places of origin. And he was ordered to do so in regard to those who survived. The accused told the court that as he said he was preparing the Nisko plan in accordance with a request by Jewish functionaries, and when the court put before him the Levenherz report, when the functionaries of Vienna, the Jews, tried to avoid the deportation of Jews further to Nisko, and the Jews were terrified, he answered, this was towards the end. And in the meantime, in Poland, the Jews were being prepared for their liquidation in accordance with the Heydrich plan. The various stages of this action conducted by Eichmann, headed by Eichmann, and later as head of Office 4 later as head of the Jewish department, this we learned from a number of sources. From evidence in court, Frank's diary, and a handful of documents which were saved. This Litzeni testified that until the year 1941, Eichmann tried to solve Jewish problems by issuing directives for ghettoization, by erecting and setting up Jewish elders, councils of the communities there. From Frank's diary it is clear that the Gestapo, which acted in the Generalgouvernement and did with the Jews as it pleased, only in May 43, after the Jews in Poland, which included millions of Jewish souls, was already liquidated, and the last survivors were awaiting their turn for extermination or tried to hide or escape, then Frank succeeded to obtaining Hitler's order that the police and the general government will obey orders from the general governor. In this matter, the words of Frank were noted, his speech, the speech he made to his close colleagues. The SS and the police from the very first was not deterred to interfere with the authority of the general government. Therefore, he was forced in the general government territory to conduct a continuous struggle between the authority of the state and between the state within a state. On the 9th of May 43, he held a lengthy conversation with the Führer, and later a sensational development took place. This struggle was decided in his favor, and as a result of his contentions, Globocnik was removed from his task in Lublin, and a milder man will replace him. But Globocnik stayed on until November 43, until the last survivors of the Jews were exterminated in the Lublin area. And the Jews, they derived no use, and there was no salvation for them. To the camps within the general government, the civil authorities had no approach at all. This transpires from the quotation in Frank's diary, a record of a meeting held by his government, by his cabinet. The subject was a whole wreath of questions in regard to Majdanek and other camps. Dr. Villa, Secretary of State, lays it down that the general government regime knows nothing about what was going on in those camps, since they had no approach and no way of learning about what was going on in the camps, because basically they were set up and conducted exclusively and directly by the center of the Vienna police and SS. And all arrangements and running of those camps, the men responsible are the central officers in Berlin. Your Honors, this was said at a meeting of the cabinet where Krieger took part. This was recorded officially, and this draws a true picture of the situation. Frank adds and says, in connection with this meeting, the general government rule and all its authorities, including those of the Lublin district, do not carry any responsibility to the camp matter, because this responsibility lies only and exclusively on the head commander of the police, Krieger, or the Reich authorities, respectively. At the end of June 43,
President of Court, Krieger had a double job, didn't he? He was also senior police and SS officer and also Secretary of State for Security Affairs, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. At the end of June 43, Katzmann, the one who liquidated the Jews of Lvov and the southeast Europe, he could report about his activities. Early in November 43, in Majdanek, the Jews were liquidated, some 200,000 in labor camps around Majdanek, and as from that date, all concentration camps except Auschwitz and another camp. The Gestapo completed its job. Frank was given full authority in Poland, but a Poland devoid of its Jews. And what is said at the meetings of his cabinet whilst in power, in the territory given over to him by the Gestapo, we shall see in a number of quotations from Frank's diary. At a meeting held on the 8th of December 39, SS Obergruppenführer Krieger speaks of problems in regard to the uprooting of...
President of Court, you will give us all the quotations later, sir?
Yes, of course, but if the court is interested in a special quotation, no, they of course will all come one after the other in the proper order as cited. On the 1st of December, daily Trains move into the general government full of Poles and Jews. From Berlin, a plan was drawn up that heads of districts connect accordingly, and this a long-term plan. And later, according to the first part of the plan, for a long-range plan, then the eastern parts of the Reich, 600,000 Jews should be transferred to the general government. No. Out of the 600,000, 40,000 should be sent on immediately. The commander of the security police, who is in charge of the technical implementation of this plan, will get in touch with head of districts concerned. And there is no, the heads of Jewish councils do not know to whom they are to report. There are orders and instructions, and they are never told about police actions taken against Jews. As a matter of principle, the conducting of Jewish economies in the hands of the police. In the middle of the year 1940, Frank informs at a meeting of his cabinet, the Führer laid down that no more Jews will be deported to the general government. The contrary, even the Jews living in the general government will be all dealt in the same manner by a special plan, so that the general government will be free and purged of Jews in a short time. SS Obergruppenführer Krieger informs that the question of deporting all Jews from the general government is now under consideration. Memorandums were drawn up regarding the way this would be carried out across the seas. The general government was negotiating in connection with the uprooting of this population only with the RSHA.
And on the eve of the Wannsee conference, Frank said at a meeting of his cabinet, with regard to the methods of operation against the Jews, we are acting within the general framework of the Reich. They must go. I have started negotiations in order to remove them further east. On this question, there will take place in Berlin a large conference in January, to which I shall dispatch Secretary of State Dr. Bühler. In any event, a mass migration of Jews will start. And what did Frank say after Wannsee? As the Secretary of State Dr. Bühler informs me, according to latest reports, there exists a plan to dissolve the Jewish ghettos, to keep those Jews who are capable of physical labor, and send the others further on east. The Jews who can work will be settled in a number of large concentration camps which are in the center of the industrial area. Another proposal coming from the Reich is to organize kidnap campaigns, kidnap operations in the big cities. Secretary of State Krieger points out that the police has planned the Jewish operation to the last detail, and its implementation now hinges only on transport. And what was done with these Jews? As long as the police rule the government general area, this we heard from several witnesses who described only a minor fraction of the horrible suffering.
President of Court, one more question, Mr. Hausner. The Counsel for the Defense will argue that there was no connection between the police and that the chain of command was direct from Heydrich to Krieger and through Krieger to Globochnik and then to the others. What is your answer to this argument?
We say that it isn't the formal aspect of this which is decisive from the point of view of criminal responsibility. I assume that when Dannecker was in Paris, he was formally subject to Knochen or to some other official. And the same applies to Zöpf in Holland, to Wisliceni in Greece, and in the same way Eichmann was subject to Winkelmann in Budapest. He had to report to Winkelmann whenever he wanted to leave and so on. But this is not the crucial point. The decisive matter is the overall planning. Therefore, it did not matter whether he could give orders or whether he could transmit instructions and directives. The truth is that we see the traces of his work in Poland less than we have the same thing in the West. That is true. But these traces which we do have are quite sufficient because, first of all, he is in the center of this entire work, and that in the Wannsee Conference it was decided unanimously that the RSHA, that is to say Eichmann, would be the man to implement the final solution everywhere. We see him dealing with foreign nationals. We see him dealing with the affairs of the Warsaw Ghetto. We find a letter dealing with Jews in a mining company in the same area. All of these are tracks leading to him. And what does he say? I had no hand in any matter in the government general area. Now, if his statements would bear the seal of truth all along the way, perhaps the court would have had to give him the benefit of the doubt. But since his version must be rejected out of hand, because we have seen that he has lied on this, and I shall try to prove this to the court in other important details. Therefore, there is no special reason to believe that precisely in the government general of all places, this area was taken out of the complex of the final solution, whereas Frank repeats all along that all the instructions and orders came from Berlin, at least until 1943. And the Berlin Center for Solving the Jewish Problem, this is Eichmann. That is first. Now, from the point of view of his responsibility as a conspirator, this certainly brings him to each and every place the moment he agrees to become an accomplice in the actual implementation of the final solution. The methods of operation in the government general area, with all the special cruelty and brutality shown and exposed in all its nakedness without a fig leaf, without any restraint whatsoever, nevertheless is identical to some extent with the methods in the West, of which we know that the instructions came from Eichmann and the direction was in his hands. Now let us analyze some of the evidence on this. Witness Lichtman told us about the system of the roundups. She said, one morning the Jewish quarter was sealed off. These were streets inhabited mainly by Jews. German soldiers and officers broke wildly into the houses. They shouted at the men to leave the homes. They threw everything out of the cupboards. They beat people up. They shot many people. They killed many people. Then the witness spoke about the establishment of the Jewish councils, about the mass deportations to the concentration camps, and then she described what happened at Mielitz. They assembled male Jews, mainly elderly male Jews. All of them were put in the great synagogue in Mielitz. There they were slaughtered and shot. Almost all of the Jews were killed. Those who tried to flee through the windows were shot from the outside. In the morning, units in black and green uniforms surrounded the place, and they brought us took us out of the homes and ordered us to the marketplace. People who could not run, people who were sick, were shot sometimes in their beds. Others were later placed in the center of the marketplace. Then young men were selected. They were ordered to step aside. The women, the children, and the old people were put in a long column, roped off, and we were in the middle. These were SS, SD, and SA people, she said. The Ed Pachta also spoke about the mass deportations. He said, when we came there, they surrounded us with such a heavy unit, such strong units, the like of which I have seen only in the front. Then they told us to stand in a half circle, and they told us that we were setting out on a march and that we had to hand over everything which we possessed. Money, gold, silver, watches. Only 20 zloty were left to each. They ordered us not to speak, not to turn around, not to look, not to come in contact with each other. They told us that whoever violates these orders will be shot. Then we were given the order to set out and march. One girl managed to run after the column, and she shouted all the time, "Father, Mother." Near Cholochines, the girl was taken away. We did not know what happened to her. All we heard was a shot. From time to time, whoever halted and tried to arrange his clothes was told to leave the column, and then we heard a shot behind us. That's how we marched in the mud, because this was the strongest, heaviest rainy season. It was in December. Then, when we already were sitting or lying down on the floor, they came and argued with us and told us that we were to blame for the war. They took all these sacred articles, and they took the two rabbis, two Jewish elders with beards, and we heard that others were also taken. We knew that 200 people were taken away, and we never saw them anymore. We did not know what happened to them. We still had hope that perhaps this was not a death march. The next morning we were placed in rows again, but there were only 3 people to a row anymore. The witness Noach Zabludovich reported about the instructions to wear the Jewish patch, and that whoever failed to obey was shot. The court will remember that in cross-examination the accused admitted that the Jewish star was planned and carried out by his department in all the areas of German occupation. This was in session 97, it is on page 1718. The instructions given in that order came from his department and were ordered by Heydrich, were signed by Heydrich, and they were designated for all the occupied areas. We shall submit a list of these instructions in writing the instructions for the Jewish star. And from the witnesses from Hungary we heard that they actually saw the cloth from which the Jewish stars were made brought into Eichmann's office. Piles and piles of that cloth. Zabladovich also testified about the concentration of the Jews in Chekhanov. Whoever was found outside of the confines was shot. The Jews were ordered to work. Whoever tried to shirk that duty was sentenced to death. That was in the Reich area, not in the government general area. That was the method, that was the recipe, which was directed from one central authority. This is how Heydrich's instructions from the 21st of September 1939 were carried out. He had instructed that the most drastic measures be employed and that every sentence against a Jew which is not a death sentence must be brought to his knowledge.
And the same picture drawn by Zawlutovitz was also referred to by Judge Bielski from Krakow. Exactly the same ghoulish picture of depression, degradation, and then labor camp of Plaszow, guarded by the SS men. And here only one more passage. A group that came from the so-called Appel Commando, which was detailed to unload the train, was seen with some crumbs of bread, some remains of food, and then the Scharführer came and said, "What are you carrying here?" Nobody answered, and then he shot at one man just like this, and then somebody struck on a wonderful idea and said, "We had brought food," and then each one of them had been given 100 lashes. They were brought to a place where those lashes were given, and they were to count. If they couldn't, the lashes were repeated. When somebody shouted while being beaten, he had to report to the commander of the camp and had to say that he thanks him very much for this punishment. And as one of the victims reported to the commander and said that he thanked him for the punishment, he left, and then the commander had shot at him. Many such other cases could be quoted. The court will remember that the accused was interrogated with regard to the liquidation of the ghettos. His police statement, after he had spoken about the liquidation of the ghetto lodge, this statement spoke about other ghettos after the liquidation of the lodge ghetto. Then Eichmann answers in the following manner. This was a matter which was done by the deputation order of the Reichsführer SS. This had to go through me. I had, of course, to deal with it because this matter was brought to the 4B4 office. This was the explanation. That means to say that he did confess that there was liquidation of the ghettos. He said it quite outspokenly. His claim that he simply made a mistake when speaking in the police interrogation is ridiculous and cannot, of course, be taken seriously. Sylvia Lubetkin spoke about the inferno of the ghetto Warsaw, on the suffering and on the actions taken against Jewish intelligentsia and leaders, against the hideous activities of Schutzpolizei and SS and the transfer to the east. What was called resettlement in the east. Rachel Auerbach spoke about the spiritual extermination which preceded the physical extermination. Dr. Berman spoke about the persecution of Jewish children, the persecution against Jewish children, about special administration dealing with the extermination of children. 100,000 Jewish children had been killed in Warsaw alone. These facts had been repeated here in reference to Przemysl, a little infant torn to pieces by a Nazi rogue, and his mother saying, "What did he do?" And then they were both killed. We heard about how Jewish children were slaughtered. Officer in the Jewish police force, Michael Goldman, had testified here, and he spoke about how children were dealt with in Poland and in the Soviet Union. And in the same way, in the West, things were carried out. Dr. Weller spoke here about special attack on Jewish intelligentsia, about their concentration, about their isolation from the world at large. And again, the same subterfuges, exactly the same camouflage activities. Dannecker, Brunner, men from Eichmann's department were dealing with these hideous activities. As the result of them, Jewish children were herded to camps. These were the children whom Eichmann and Dannecker promised a very good relaxation in Auschwitz. And what happened, according to what Dr. Weller said? There were little infants amongst them, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, who didn't even know their name. It was even impossible to identify them by means of questions which are asked by other children or by nurses. Only indirectly was it possible to find out the names of those infants. All of a sudden, they were torn away from the parents' home, came to a transit camp, and starved in torn clothes. When we opened the door, says Dr. Weller, of barracks, we saw a little boy about 7 years old, and one could see that those clothes were good once, and that they had seen better days. It was apparently a child from a good and well-to-do family. And René Blum asked him how old he was. He said, "My name is Jacques Stern." Then he asked him about the parents. And the boy said that father's working in the office and mother is playing the piano. And then he came to us, says Dr. Weller, to me and René Blum, asking me whether he was to see his parents very shortly. Of course, we had to tell them that they would very soon leave the Drancy camp and join their families. We knew this was a lie, but of course we didn't know what was attendant upon those children. We didn't know what lay in store for these children in Auschwitz. We only knew that they were brought to Drancy, and we knew how they were treated there, and we knew that whatever is going to happen to them, they will not join their parents. But we had to lie to them at that time. This is what Dr. Weller said. We said to the boy, don't worry, within 2 or 3 days you shall leave the camp and join your parents, see your mother again. This is what we said to him. Then he took out of his jacket a little piece of biscuit and said, this is what I've kept. This is I'm going to give to my mother. These were the biscuits which were then distributed among children. Then René Blum looked at the boy, and the little boy burst into tears. This boy that only a moment ago had been blithe and joyful, all of a sudden burst into tears. And then we left the room. We couldn't stand it any longer. They were all sent. They were all sent at the end of August, the beginning of September, in transports, including 1,000 children each, and 500 grown-ups were attached to each transport. This is how they were sent.
Dr.
Weller further stated that selections were being carried out. He spoke about those arbitrary selections perpetrated by Eichmann's messengers. These selections were to decide who is going to be sent to what place, who is going to be sent to the east. Brunner and Redke were dealing with it, and Dannecker would intervene from time to time in order to add something to this list. Another few names, and we have heard about persecution of Jewish children from other people, from Dr. Dvorzhetsky from Vilna, Dr. Peretz from Vilna, from all the witnesses who came here and testified. The Jewish child, the future of the people, the biological material in Eichmann's lingo. This was the first victim of extermination. This was the first to be annihilated. Torture and persecutions were part and parcel of the general framework of activities in the West as well.
Brunner,
the one about whom Wisliceni said that he is Eichmann's protege. Eichmann's blue-eyed boy was dealing with this in particular. And here is what Dr. Weller says in this connection. They would stick they put the stick in the ground, and the tortured man was to touch it with his right hand, and to put the left hand behind his back, and to turn like a top around this stick. This was called the torture of the top. Of course, it was extremely difficult to do so because the stick was very low, and the tortured man would not be able to do it. If he was not able to spin around the stick, he would be penalized severely. It is absolutely impossible to turn more than 3 or 4 times around the stick because the head is low. But of course the tormentors would not be satisfied with this and would bid people to spin around 10 or more times. But then people would faint due to weakness. This was satanic torture, a particular pastime, a very favorite pastime of the SS men. Brunner was a tall man with wicked face, with fat and moist lips, and he would always be particularly happy to torture. and they called him Boxer because he looked like a boxer dog, he would be very happy to bring people to cellars and torture them. This was also his favorite pastime. From the time of the arrival of Brunner in the camp, he conducted the camp as a typical German concentration camp with the routine persecutions, routine bullying. He organized it in accordance with what had been done in other such places, Buchenwald, Auschwitz and others. And a special team of Jews had been set up in this camp that were to search among their fellow inmates. Unquote. This is what Dr. Veller said. This plan to use the Jews for the service of the Gestapo, this was the most satanic part in this hideous plan. We heard about it for the first time when Eichmann lured Löwenherz into cooperation by means of this typical slap in the face. This machine had been then brought into operation as a permanent instrument all throughout the occupied area. Eichmann admitted that this system had been introduced to Poland as well as in Hungary at a later stage. This facilitated matters and simplified and streamlined it considerably. Eichmann knew how to make this work efficient. And as it was being told in Warsaw that Jews were being sent into the East, the same news was well known in Berlin. As, for example, Dutch Jews were promised not to be deported, as it was pointed out by Dr. Melkman. Gorfein and Sanok had heard exactly the same lies, exactly the same tricks and the same subterfuges and ruses. The system of Janowska camp in Lvov, about which Leon Menz testified, these were the methods applied everywhere, in all other camps. And here, the quotation from Wells.
They froze to death. They were finished. They walked with the ice on top of them. Untersturmführer Bliehaus came to the camp about a week later. At that time, a shooting match began between Giebauer and Bliehaus. Both would stand near the window when the inmates would carry heavy stones back and forth, and they would select the nose or finger as a target and would shoot. In the evening, they would parade around the camp and take the people who were called kaput, wounded people and people who were no longer fit for physical work, and would liquidate them with a final shot. Giebauer acquired a reputation as an expert in strangling. This was his hobby. One man was standing next to me. He looked sideways. He did not look as busy as he should have looked. Giebauer came along and strangled him with his own hands to death. And Bliehaus, about whom we knew that he was the brother-in-law of the SS General Katzmann, would come to the camp once or twice a week since Bliehaus had come. His hobby was not strangulation, but sharpshooting, sniping. Here too, the band played when the people left for work and when they came, as was the case in the death camps, about which we heard from other witnesses. These are the words with which Rudolf Hess begins his book about the extermination of the Jews, the book called A Commander at Auschwitz. It is our exhibit T90. In the summer of 1941, I do not remember the exact date, I was called to Berlin to the Reichsführer SS. Not as he used to do, he opened the conversation not in the presence of an adjutant and said more or less, the Führer had ordered the final solution of the Jewish problem. We, the SS, have to carry out this order. The existing places for extermination in the East cannot cope with a big task. Therefore, I have selected Auschwitz, first of all because of the convenient transport links, and secondly because the place can easily be camouflaged and sealed off. This is a back-breaking work which will require full devotion regardless of difficulties and hardships. Additional details you will receive from Sturmbannführer Eichmann of the RSHA, who will come to see you in the next days. And as we know from Wisliceni, Eichmann devoted since 1941 special attention to the work of extermination in the East. Let us follow this work, his cooperation with the Einsatzgruppen and with the death camps. His direct collaboration with the Einsatzgruppen has several facets, and there is quite a bit of evidence about it. Schellenberg had told Judge Musmano that Eichmann had supervised the Einsatzgruppen in all that regards the extermination of Jews, that he had been present when the Einsatzgruppen received their instructions. That's where Schellenberg saw him, and he visited the units during the executions. Eichmann he admitted here that he was present at a large meeting before the most secret Operation Barbarossa began, a meeting at which the organizational arrangements were reviewed, as he said in his police interrogation. He wanted to convince the court that all that was discussed there were appointments of commanders to the Einsatzgruppen, and that for that purpose he and his deputy and others were troubled only to hear about matters which did not pertain to them, which were not their concern, and which were top secret of the Reich. But what really happened at this meeting in the Prince Albert Palace, this we know from Walter Blume's affidavit, Exhibit T306. We know that there Heydrich and Streckenbach repeated the instructions for the liquidation of Jews. Wisliceni reports that when the Commissar's decree was extended to apply to the extermination of Jews as well, Eichmann immediately saw in this an opening for exterminating other Jewish communities as well. We knew that his department received reports, and he admits that as well. And from Noske's affidavit, which I have already mentioned, we know that reports about Jewish matters had to go to Eichmann according to special instructions. Defense witness from Bach-Zelewski testified that if Eichmann's department did indeed receive reports of the Einsatzgruppen, this gives it added prominence. In cross-examination, Eichmann gave a very important statement, made an important admission, which was that he had arrange places of absorption for people deported from the Reich in the Einsatzgruppen camps of Nebe and Rasch. It was in session 98, page 30. He admitted that he was in telegraphic contact with them, and after the number of the Reich deportees was determined, the people who would be sent to those camps, then his department took care of the transport angle. That means that he very clearly cooperated with them and that he was part of one and the same conspiracy with them. Finally, after his usual contortions and evasions, he admitted that he knew what was in store for the Jews in those camps. From his department also emanated the instructions to the commanders of the Einsatzgruppen. Because there remained intact the documents of the Foreign Ministry, again we see those documents which deal with Jews of foreign nationality. And again, after the pressure during the examination, the accused admitted that his department did send those instructions. He also admitted that he had seen the Einsatzgruppen with his own eyes in operation near Minsk and Lviv. How the Jews of the Reich were deported there, this we heard from a number of survivors. Leona Neumann spoke about the deportation from Vienna in sealed wagons which traveled 8 days. A report about such deportations from Düsseldorf was sent to Eichmann. It exists, it was submitted to court. It is a report about the atrocities of these deportations. President of Court, was this about, were these people sent to the Einsatzgruppen? Mr. Hausner, yes, to Riga, to Einsatzgruppe A. Leona Neumann reported how the deportees were housed in homes which had previously belonged to Jews who were killed since, how they were ordered to repair clothes of the murdered people to be sent to the Reich. And she remembers that during that work, from time to time, a person would scream out loud when he held in his hands the blood-stained coat of his little girl who had been shot. And she also spoke about executions. 5 days after they had come there, only 300 people survived from the 1,000 deportees from Vienna. And those survivors were also liquidated after some time. We remember the report of the commander of the Einsatzgruppe A about those Jews from the Reich who came with a naive hope about their future because they had been told before they left that they were going to a settlement project in the East. The apparatus of deception worked in good order. Chaim Beren too heard in Minsk that in order to absorb the deportees from the Reich there, 28,000 local Jews had been shot only a few days previously. That then was the arrangement. In the same pace in which Nebe and Rasch managed to liquidate the Jews of the Soviet Union, Eichmann sent them fresh Jews from the Reich. And then the direct murders began, and from the massive concentration of 100,000 Jews in the Minsk area, only a few score survived. Avraham Aviel testified about the life wish which